Behaviorism is a systematic approach to understanding the behavior of human and other animals. It assumes that behavior is either a reflex evoked by the pairing of certain antecedent stimuli in the environment or a consequence of that individual is history, including special reinforcement and punishment. John Brandes Watson founded behaviorism just before World War I. Behaviorism was dominant from about 1920 to about 1970. It was called second force in psychology, with its rival psychoanalysis as the first force. The third force was humanistic, phenomenological, and existential psychology, together with growing influence of cognitive psychology. Watson proposed a completely objective psychology. He applied the principle and technique of animal psychology to human beings. He insisted on the primacy of behavior rather than of consequence. He insisted on the primacy of behavior rather than of consciousness. He rejected the mentalistic concept in psychology. He objected the introspective psychology of Titchener and functional psychology of Engel. Watson wanted to free psychology of metaphysical concern. He denied the existence of mind. Watson declared that behavioristic psychology must be purely objective, ruling out all subjective data of conscious experience. For him, psychology became the science of behavior rather than the traditional science of conscious experience. Watson's goal was to predict and control overt behavior. Antecedent stimuli. An antecedent is a stimulus that cause an organism to perform a learned behavior. When an organism perceives an antecedent stimulus, it behaves in a way that minimizes reinforcement. It behaves in a way that minimizes reinforcing consequence. This might be part of complex. Reinforcement is a consequence applied that will Reinforcement is a consequence applied that will strengthen an organism's future behavior whenever that behavior is preceded by a specific antes- antecedent stimuli. Antecedent stimulus. The strengthening effect may be measured as a higher frequency of behavior, longer duration, greater magnitude punishment. In open condition, punishment is any change in a human or animal surrounding which occurring after a given behavior or re- response reduce the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in future. Conditioning in behavior psychology is a theory that the reaction to an object or event by a person or animal can be modified by learning or conditioning. The most well-known form of this is classical conditioning, and Skinner built on it to produce operant conditioning. Watson turned energetically into a human problem in 1920. In collaboration with Rayner, he first ascertained that fury animal caused no fear in children about a year old, then struck his bar whenever the child touched the fury animal. Fear in response to the animal without the bar was soon evident. Despite its crudeness, this experiment immediately had a profound effect on American psychology. Lange was to emphasize the right of the behavioristic to think of mental process as internal form of behavior, the relation of language to thought being especially stressed. Wattson's most important theoretical contribution was the suggestion. In particular, imagination and thought have been stated in terms of implicit muscular behavior. The study of language is therefore of paramount importance for the formulation of behavioristic theory. Active language and passive language. One acting as substitute for a situation evoke the same response that the situation themselves would elicit. The meaning of a word is nothing but a conditioned response to that word. What the word bottle means is the behavior in reference to it. If bottle glass and picture have to be grasped and manipulated in different ways, the meaning are provided by the different motor responses. Active language is a large problem. The child develops purely through trial and error variation, sound which by approximating genuine word, the child learns to say dada and later doll by the same mechanism. If the word dada is used and is understood by other to mean doll, it serves the purpose. The only thing necessary is that it should work. Whenever it fails to work, further trial and error occur until doll is uttered. Watson suggested that thinking is an implicit behavior. To him, like all other aspects of human functioning, thinking is also sensory-motor behavior. He reasoned that the behavior of thinking is implicit speech movement. Trial and error goes on in implicit language behavior. Each word or phrase in the thinking process serving as a substitute for some act. Behaviorism, therefore, has stated that thought process in terms of language. We thought the conditioned response serve in place of similarly conditioned overt act. Implicit and explicit behavior. Watson was the first American behaviorist who insisted that behaviorism is the only valid scientific psychology, that no other form of psychology exists. Western psychology deals with overt and observable behavior of the organism, it, its muscle, gland, and tissue, etc. Explicit behavior include all observable activities such as walking, talking, smiling, singing, and implicit behavior include the secretion of gland, muscle, contraction, vascular, and nerve function. Sensation and perception. Behaviorists reject the notion of sensation because no one can observe another person's sensation. What can be observed is the response to a certain stimulus, visual, auditory, or olfactory. Perception could be studied objectively. Watson suggested that by the use of any wavelength and of an electric shock, a conditioned reflex could be established. In this way, the range of the individual perception is determined. Watson believed that emotion is a hereditary pattern reaction involved profound change of the bodily mechanism as a whole, particularly of the vascular and glandular system. Tomixin and detomixin. Watson difference between two kinds of the complex reflex activity called emotion. One lead towards movement. This is the tomixin reflex activity. The other type, detomixin reflex activity, release the movement. Kind of emotion. Watson maintained that three innate emotions could be found in infinite range: fear and love. These are the basic pattern reaction which are inherited. Any other emotion is acquired by conditioning. Watson experimentally demonstrated this theory in his study of an 11-month-old infant, Albert, who was conditioned to fear a white rat. He had no fear before the conditioning trials. The fear was established by making a loud noise, striking a steel board with a hammer behind Albert's head whenever the rat was presented to him. In a short time, the mere sight of the rat produced signs of fear and discomfort in the child. Western conclude that emotions are simply bodily responses to specified stimuli. The stimulus, the stimulus produce internal bodily change and the appropriate learn overt response. Each emotion involves its particular pattern of change in the general bodily mechanism, particularly in the vascular and glandular system. Personality is the end product of our habit system. Behaviorists regard personality as a totality of behavior patterns. These patterns are quite consistent but not unchangeable. According to behavioristic point of view, in the study of personality, the conditioned and the unconditioned reflects the physical and social environment and its influence on personality development should be considered. Instinct. Initially, Weston accepted the role of instinct in behavior. In his book, An Introduction to Comparative Psychology, he described in detail element instinct, but in 1925, Weston changed his position and ruled out the concept of instinct. All the aspects of human behavior are in reality socially conditioned responses. According to Western, learning is a key to understanding to development of human behavior. Western not only denied the role of instinct in behavior, but he refused to admit the inherited capacities, temperaments, or talent of any kind. He is an environmentalist. Physiology and psychology. According to Western psychology, deal with what is or can be observed. What is observed is the explicit behavior, and what can be observed is the implicit behavior. Physiology Physiology deals with the definite function of the organism and know nothing of the total situation in the daily life of an individual that shape his action and conduct. Weston's most favorite subject was psychological care of infant and child. He offered many practical suggestions about how to minimize the development of inappropriate conditioned emotional reaction. To him, the home should be set up to minimize the occurrence of banging door and other sudden loud sound that could create fear response. And children should be dressed in loose clothing to prevent unnecessary range response. About all children should never be stimulated into love responses. William McDougall defined psychology as the positive science of conduct. He made experimental observation on color discrimination in Infinite in 1901. In 1912, he named his book Psychology, the Study of Behavior. Max, Max Meyer published The Fundamental Law of Human Behavior in 1911. George John Roman's Animal Intelligence was published in 1886. Jacques Loeb is responsible for the concept of tropism or force movement. It is an irresistible and mechanical movement of move towards light. Albrecht Beth published a mechanistic interpretation of the social lives of ants and bees. Ian Thorndike also studied the animal behavior and understand said that Thorndike was more modern behaviorist than Western because his idea about learning and reinforcement were more modern. Other prominent earlier behaviorists Albert P. Weiss was among the most careful and ingenious of the early behaviorists. He believed that psychology must operate as natural science. All reference of conscious and mental should be eliminated, along with the subjective method of introspection. To him, psychology is a branch of physics. It should not claim a non physical entity, conscious, as its subject matter. He suggested that psychology must study both physiological and social process. Core S. Lochley is known for the problem of brain function as related to behavior. Lochley's unique contribution was that he brought behavioral technique into cooperation with the best available physiological technique. Xinjiang Kyo adopted an extremely environmentalistic position than J.B. Boston. Kyo watched the development of behavior in the embryo chick by replacing part of the shell with a small transparent window. He found that much chick behavior which appeared to be instinctive is rarely learned during the embryonic period as a function of condition within the egg. Kyo differed from Western in that within the Kyo differed from Western is that he preferred to think of continuities in behavior rather than of conditioning as a basic explanation of behavior change. Donald O. Habe, Donald O. Habe opposed mentalism. He emphasized on neurological aspect of psychology and the localization of self. He accepted Western theory of emotion, fear, rage, and love. He believed that learning took place even in these emotions. To sudden disruption in neural connection in the cortex cause fear. Animal and children fear the unknown and are frightened by the sudden change. The disruption may be due to conflict, sensory defect, or cons- constitutional change. Fear, like other emotion, is a sort of neurological disturbedness. It is a disruption of timing in the activity of neurons.